Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and welcome to the grand finale, the final episode in our ginormous review/overview/campaign diary for the epic Traveller campaign Secrets of the Ancients, as our plucky heroes must make a choice to either save or doom the galaxy in Chapter 10. Grandfather Lies. The chapter is 20 pages, but once you remove some of the full-page art and the deck plans for the coolest Traveller ship ever, it's really only 17 pages long. It offers us a whole lot. We have a ton of weird bad guys, new tech, thrilling action. This is the type of chapter where our heroes are going to be flying shape-changing liquid metal starships between sentient, semi-organic skyscrapers as they're getting chased by flying killbots armed with disintegrator blasters. They pulled all the stops for this chapter, and it was epic. We also have some very interesting roleplay where we get to answer many of the questions about the Traveller universe and the plot as to what all's been going on this entire time, which we'll get into a little bit more of that after the spoiler warning. There is a ton of different encounters and events that could happen just depending on whatever it is that the Travellers do and decide to go. However, we blew through this adventure in record time, maybe 6 hours. Once they finally got on target, they managed to stay on target until the very end. However, there are a couple spots that I feel could be fleshed out a little bit more, and a few minor tweaks that I made in order to improve this game. So that's what we're going to talk about today. My tips, my criticisms, and praises on how to run this finale as a game master who has successfully run this campaign. So let's reintroduce our heroes. They are Benjamin, retired naval captain, decorated war hero who's been suffering some really weird headaches lately. Otter Beckett, ship's mechanic and former spy who really hopes to take his wife to see Bimmy Juffet once this whole saving the galaxy thing is done. Peachy Brevis, archaeologist, robot and computer whiz who brought his mother along on the adventure because of course that's what player characters do. And Lily, a hotshot pilot, former belter who really regrets donating that money to the Church of the Chosen One a few years ago. They're joined by Hilda Beckett, a primitive hunter from a red zone world and Otter's newlywed wife. Dr. Ora Brevis, celebrated archaeologist and planetologist who hasn't just somehow survived all of this, but thrived. Amelia, an astromech droid that's realized that it's sometimes safer to stay on board the ship. Killjeg, Peachy's crew droid, happy to finally have something to do. And Squirt, an adorable seed spitter currently hunting fluffy tribbles in the ship somewhere. Their ship is the Star Hunter, a pimped-out tech-level 15 far trader with a hideous paint job and a transponder loaded with phony names. But before we go any further, I must warn you that there will be spoilers. So any players in the audience, please stop here. Send your referees this way to learn about running this campaign for you. But if you keep going and you spoil yourself, well, guess you have no choice but to run this thing yourself. Okay, Game Masters, let's get this show started, or I guess more aptly, let's go ahead and finish this thing off. This finale has been a long time coming. When we last left our heroes, they tracked 7's secret base down to the planet of Zoe, discovering its entrance 11 kilometers beneath the ocean. Killjeg flew them down into orbit, and wearing their fancy high-pressure shimmer suits, the Travelers leaped out and dove into the crushing depths. Now, one thing in the last episode, several people pointed out that 11 kilometers is 1,101 atmospheres of pressure, while the suits are rated for only 1,000 atmospheres worth of pressure. And yes, while that is true on Earth, those people failed to take into account that Zoe is 0.9 gravity, making it 991 atmospheres of pressure, somewhere thereabouts. So yes, the suits made for the adventure can handle the pressure that's they're encountering within the adventure. So Game Masters, you might want to have your ship's computer assure your players of this little detail in case, any of their old players try to be smart without taking into account all the available information, or just simply change it and state that it's 9 kilometers down beneath the ocean. Avoid any confusion in that manner. Sinking into the black depths, the suits automatically switched off their external lights and radios to avoid detection, the only sensation being the creaking of their suits to compensate for the pressure. Eventually they see a light flickering below them, and the Travelers realize they're falling through a huge shaft cut into the planet's crust. Eventually they reach an energy membrane. The gravity shifts as they find themselves standing in an enormous hangar with stacks of cargo crates against the wall. There are 2 of Vu's courier ships here, both unoccupied at the moment. There's also an enormous teleporter here. It never specifies how big this teleportal is, but it needs to be large enough to accommodate at least a 200-ton ship, because we find a couple 200-ton ships inside the city, so there needs to be a way for those ships to get in and out. A Gravelov train station is along one side, and stepping into it will carry them on into the city.
Hey guys, there's a railroad here. You get it? Because that's the only path that I can see going forward.
Grandfather took over Benjamin and told the travelers that they needed to find Seven's mental archive and disable it before Seven can transfer to his new body. Now just look for the monstrous cybernetic ship and it should be near that. He intends to go dormant in case Seven has psionic security that can detect another ancient, and he encourages the player characters might want to use a little bit of stealth for this job. The adventure sort of assumes that the player characters will quickly move through this opening portion and just get on with the exciting part, so it really doesn't offer any more information for this hangar portion right here, but they really underestimated my players.
Hey, what's in these crates over here? Also, once we kill Seven, how do we get out of here? I say we hotwire one of these ships.
There's a railroad here. Get it?
Cracking open some of the crates, the travelers discovered food and consumables for about 100,000 people, mostly Droin and Vargar, but also some other species as well, human, Aslan, Hiver, and a few more than that. Now, using his killer computer skills, Peachy managed to hack into one of the ships, updating its security to make them the authorized users. Now, this took a while for them to do, and because I knew that there was going to be a group that was planning to leave the world city soon, I decided to have a pair of Vargar pilots arrive by the Gravelov train to start prepping one of the ships for departure. So once they arrived, we rolled to see which ship it was, and it ended up being the other ship that the pilots are planning to use.
Hey guys, since they already unlocked that starship over there, why don't we just head on over there, tase their asses, and hijack that starship too?
So they snuck aboard that ship, took out the crewmen, hacked their ship, and dragged their bodies back to the first ship that they'd seized. They discovered a high-tech chip that was implanted in the captain, and interrogating, they discovered that many of the city's residents are implanted with these control chips for the world city's vast teleporter network.
Oh wow, there is a giant teleporter here that I totally forgot to check out.
I think he got distracted making railroad jokes.
Peachy managed to extract the chip, and while the captain didn't know where the archive was, he gave them a general layout of this world city, and as a train was loaded with passengers, was leaving the city, and it pulled into the station, the travelers activated the portal and stepped through. We spent almost an hour on this section, essentially on the doorstep of the dungeon before they finally decided to enter the city. Now, some of what they did was really helpful and prepared them for what it was they were going to find inside, but other stuff like a sudden interest in the shipping routes and supply line networks for all the crates that they discovered, not so much. Basically, their fear of entering the dungeon caused them to come up with any distraction they could in order to delay going in the dungeon, so I didn't believe that we were going to finish the adventure this session, but I was wrong. The world city is enormous. It's a spherical cave with a surface area about the size of a continent. At its heart, almost 1,000 kilometers above, floats a star, or at least a piece of the system's star that's been teleported in here, turning this cavern into a mini Dyson sphere with grav plates along all sides. Factories the size of cities gnaw at the planet's bones, mining ore for Seven's fleet of sentient warships. Towering buildings of living machinery grow towards the sun, moving and snaking around each other. These things are sentient, and they could talk to you and alter their shape for whatever it is that the people inside need. Huge platforms float above the city, and inside of a rib-like hangar, Seven's replacement body is being reconstructed. The city is only a few 100,000 people, but it's large enough to hold millions, a promise of a future when it will become the capital of Seven's galactic empire. It's divided into 5 sections, which are really well described, but there is no map for this, so I went ahead and made a crude one for my game. Now, from the starport hangar, the first section is the Quarter of the Chosen. It's primarily Vargar, especially Vargar priests, who see this as a vision of heaven where no one ages, where there's no disease or poverty, and all the dead can be resurrected. Vargar who are deemed worthy enough to come here leave as fanatics for the Church of the Chosen Ones and Seven's cause. The central area is the public quarter, with museums and zoos and theaters and genetic archives that can fast-grow clones of whatever animal or planet it is that you want from 1,000 different worlds. Special psionic zones give non-psions the power to converse telepathically with each other. Again, this should look like a technological utopia. The Droin district is the largest. Many of the residents are virtually immortal, having served Seven since the time of the Final War. Now, while the adventure doesn't mention this, I think it would be kind of cool if the travelers might recognize one or two of the Droin from their time as the precursors in Chapter 6. Then we have the Quarter of Heroes. This is the smallest, but home to Seven's 100 or so agents, like Navor and Vlyn Backett. The idea is that each agent goes out for a few decades, gets whatever information or does whatever missions it is, and then returns to lie low for a century or two at their own estates. Finally, the floating platforms, which are above the city and only accessible via flight or teleporter. Game Master should really paint this place as a technological paradise, what it calls a utopia in chains. It should seem marvelous and wonderful, but ultimately a gilded cage of what life under Seven would be like. Now, the travelers can move about the city as they please. People just assume that they're among Seven's many followers, possibly revered agents. However, if they are revealed to be intruders, there is a lot of ways that might happen. That is when we're going to have a non-stop battle against a near limitless army of bad guys. So it gives us some difficulties for either deception or stealth checks for each city section, which of course we have some bonuses or penalties on, depending on whatever it is that the travelers do. Each section has various encounters that game masters might use, and there's a few cool options in here. Some of them are potential threats, others are possible assets that the travelers might use to their advantage, and others are just simply flavor for fleshing this place out a little bit more. Now, stepping through the teleportal, the travelers arrived at the public quarter, and they stayed pretty well hidden. I had them see one of Seven's agents, a human who had recently returned from Capital, giving a report on the Imperial Court. Now, Benjamin, having an extremely high social status of either 14 or 15, he had a chance of being recognized by this guy because he was so famous, but Benjamin stayed pretty well hidden. However, he did recognize this agent as being a politician extremely close to the Emperor.
Guys, no matter what happens, we gotta take that dude out. How about we get up there and kill that ancient robot warship first? One thing at a time.
Teleporting their way up to the platforms, they saw the archive. It looks like a giant sphere that's bisected by one of the grav platforms, but there's only one door, and it's protected by a pair of Scourge machines, the massive killbots the size of airplanes that we encountered before. Now, sneaking inside, Grandfather seized control of Benjamin's body and led them through the tunnels to the heart of the archive. Again, we get no map for this place, but since I knew we were going to be doing a lot of fighting in here, I quickly sketched out a rough map on the table that looked a lot like this. Now, it's a real simple one with passageways curving out of sight and several doors that might open to reveal bad guys. Entering the archive, Benjamin, or I guess Grandfather at least, got to work. Now, as he did, the alarms went off. Now, because Seven's archive is so valuable, the Scourge machines, they can't risk blasting at this thing with their giant disintegrators, so the travelers had to hold off several waves of joined strike teams and assassin drones. Now, this was a frantic fight as they held the passage, trying to give time for Grandfather to work. Now, this should be pretty brutal, but remember, with the travelers' shimmer suits and their disintegrator gauntlets, it shouldn't be too terribly difficult for them. So, we're blowing out passage walls and the floors as this battle is raging on, and we're using Ancient's technology to fire at each other. Grandfather, meanwhile, discovered a vat with a clone body inside of it, so he uploaded his mind to this body, freeing Benjamin. Stepping out in his new clone body, Grandfather declares that there's but one final step, but as he touched the controls, a previously undetected security system activated. A blast of psionic energy erupted, and all the travelers, including Grandfather, were knocked unconscious. The travelers awoke in what looked to be Uncle Vlyn's lodge from back in Alel. Their shimmer suits and ancient weapons were still on them, but they'd been deactivated. Grandfather lay in the corner, some sort of metallic spider thing clamped to his face to block his psionics and keep him under control. Now, as their vision slid back into focus, they saw Uncle Vlyn looking at them, perfectly healthy and carrying a handful of wine glasses. He greeted them with a smile, especially Otter and Benjamin, and said how they had built this lodge from his memories as an exact duplicate, as that would aid with the transition to his new body. He tells them that the others wanted to kill the travelers, but he talked them out of it, or at least talked them out of it until Seven is resurrected, which means he's got about 15 minutes to save their lives. This here is the big moment. Uncle Vlyn, whose death started this entire chain of events, who was revealed to not only be a ruthless crime lord, but an immortal agent, is here to answer all their questions that they certainly have, and also tell them information that he hopes will persuade them into joining him in serving Seven.
Oh, well, this is gonna be rich.
Yeah, Vin, 'cause I never knew you was Uncle Vlyn. I knew you was Vin Yasha, so screw you and your crappy wine.
Vlyn tells them that he served Seven for the last 1,000 years, living many different lives. His job is to find about any remaining ancients that are out there, but also recruit any other agents, which he'd also planned to recruit Otter and Benjamin. He also tells them that Grandfather's story about him building the ancients' empire and then cloning himself into his sons simply isn't true. The key here is to play Uncle Vlin as sincere. He truly loves the inheritors, and he honestly believes everything that he says. Vlin tells him that with Grandfather's death, Seven will emerge from hiding and conquer all of chartered space. The Imperium, the Aslans, the Hivers, all of them will fall under Seven's rule. No one can stop it. But with Seven comes all of his technology as well. His servants are going to be immortal. There's going to be no more suffering or war or poverty under Seven's rule. He also tells them of some imminent threats, like a psionic wave that's heading their way, or the Black Fleets and the Primordials, the ultra-advanced race that was preceded the Ancients. Meanwhile, Grandfather, he wouldn't protect any of the worlds in the galaxy. He only cares about his research and would gladly sacrifice the entire Imperium for just one more data point in his experiments. The Travelers have witnessed what Grandfather's rule looks like when they were in the Pocket Dimension, the abandoned and forgotten experiments, civilizations and bell jars, and maybe when Vlin is talking to him, the Travelers can begin understanding Vlin's argument as to why he would rather be with Seven. However, my players were not having it. Otter even got up to inspect the device that was strapped to Grandfather's head, and when Vlin told him to sit down, Otter refused, so Vlin drew his Gauss pistol.
Look, if you're gonna shoot me, but I am done talking to you, Uncle Vlin.
As Vlin lifted his gun to fire, something happened. Out in deep orbit, the star trigger that Benjamin and Grandfather had spent the last several weeks working on activated. Now, Grandfather had planned for this to happen after they'd all left, but their getting captured wasn't part of his timeline plan. Now, one thing that I changed here is the adventure places the star trigger aboard the Traveler's ship, but because one, I didn't know if my players might figure out some crazy way of bringing their ship down into this place with them, and two, Ancient's technology is almost impossible to detect, unlike a tech level 15 starship. So I had Grandfather drop the star trigger out of an airlock shortly after they reached the Zoe system. In fact, he originally suppressed Benjamin's memory of him doing this, and even his ability to notice that the star trigger just wasn't sitting there anymore. But Benjamin, however, did notice that it was gone, and he panicked and he checked the ship's surveillance footage to see himself loading it in an airlock that he didn't remember doing, and he freaked out because it was now this rogue superweapon out there on the loose. Then Grandfather had to speak up, and he told him just to chill the hell out, that he'd not wanted Benjamin to know that the star trigger was deployed, just in case they'd gotten captured and psionically interrogated, and just to trust Grandfather. But the point being is that I think it works a lot better if the star trigger is not located on their ship. Anyway, so the star trigger activates. Not much, it's barely noticeable on the scale of an entire star, but this is being aimed at the tiny piece of a star that's just being teleported into Seven's hidden lair just a couple hundred kilometers overhead, and that affects it a whole hell of a lot. So as Vlin is leveling his weapon at the unarmed travelers, the star above flares, the ground shakes, the lights flicker, and then the light outside the window starts turning an eerie red. This distracted Vlin long enough for the travelers to make their move. Unable to bring himself to shoot Otter and seeing Benjamin lunging at him with murderous intent, Vlin just lowered his pistol and dropped to his knees. He said that he couldn't do it, and that if anyone was going to kill them, he wanted it to be the inheritors. So he just ended up shouting, "Do it!" to Benjamin, and Benjamin slashed Uncle Vlin's throat with his dew claw.
Farewell, Uncle Vlin.
We probably should have asked him why Harlan killed himself in Chapter 1, how he even got to working for Seven in the first place.
Crap.
Once freed, Grandfather had no problem reactivating all the Travelers' ancient technology. He said that they didn't have much time to stop Seven from uploading to his new body and then escaping before the star trigger went critical. Now, for my game, because the Travelers were prisoners, as Grandfather was also among these prisoners, I had the cabin be encircled by forces of droid and security drones, and, while they were all distracted with the stars going nuts up above them, the Travelers would have to shoot their way out of this place if they planned on leaving by the front door. And also, because this was an exact copy of Vlin's cabin from Chapter 2, that also included the cache of weapons, including the plasma rifle, FGHP, and the combat drugs.
Wait, if this is an exact copy of Vlin's cabin, I wonder if there's a trapdoor that leads to a hangar with Star Hunter in it.
Checking it out, they discovered a secret underground hangar just like before, though it didn't have the Star Hunter. Instead, it held a 100-ton Tech Level 25 scout ship called the Dart. Now, this ship is freaking awesome. It's Thrust 6, Jump 6, 15 points of armor, auto repair, virtual crew, double turret with high-yield particle beams, is powered by a teleportal to a Dyson sphere, giving it unlimited power, and it changes shape from round to elongated once it flies.
Holy crap! It's the Flight of the Navigator ship! This is an actual dream come true. Best day ever.
My dear uncle just died.
You'll get over it. It's easier the second time.
Blasting out of the cave, the travelers raced towards the archive. I threw a couple of the Scourge machines in their path just to intercept them. Now these things are huge, and their antimatter cannons do 3d6 worth of ship damage, making them an actual threat to the Dart's armor. So since these things are the size of a small craft, we did this like a dogfight over the city, and actually through the city. So while these Scourge machines are normally pretty slow, just for dramatic purposes, I upped these to having starship speed of thrust 2. Meanwhile, the city is in total chaos. The solar flares have disrupted the living skyscrapers. They're now growing and moving in random directions, sloughing off walls like snake skins and colliding into each other. The floating platforms are slamming into one another and sending debris crashing down below. So as the travelers are kind of weaving and dodging all these Scourge machines, trading fire, Lily is also dodging these buildings. There's something, growing up in their path or crashing down before them. So they're banking and weaving these obstacles as they're trying to get away from these things. And then the bad guys, of course, they're dodging them too. So one of the Scourge machines ended up getting crushed by one of the falling debris after Lily had dodged it, while another one of the Scourge machines managed to kind of punch its way straight through a skyscraper as it was coming straight at them. So the travelers, they're making all these piloting checks and gunner turret checks and all these sensor checks trying to find the correct path in order to get through there. It was freaking amazing. I loved this scene so damn much because it was absolutely crazy, because I'm throwing freaking skyscrapers at the player characters and they're weaving through them. It was fantastic. So pulling up to the archive building, they landed the ship just right in front of that single entrance, blocking it from anyone else to get through. Then Grandfather and one team charged inside, fighting their way to the control center, while the second team manned the Dart to repel forces. This whole part was one hell of a fight, because once the travelers, they managed to get to the control center, Grandfather goes inside. He's pushing his way through this onslaught of psionic defense, kind of dragging himself just to get up to the controls. Now the travelers, they have to hold this place off until he is finished, and that can really be about as long as the Game Master just feels is best for them to be able to hold this place. So I had a few wave of bad guys come at them. This time Seven's forces are prepared for the Traveler's Shimmer suit, so the droid troopers all had Mason rifles that can cut through even Shimmer suit armor. Various kill bots, and eventually the bad guys, they blasted holes at other points in the archive building in order just to get inside and get to the Traveler. So we've got fighting going on through the halls as, this one team at the main entrance is blasting at everything that they see. Now as the walls and floors are all being disintegrated by these powerful weapons, the battlefield cover just keeps changing round to round, and the travelers, they finally start dropping through some of the holes in the floor, then moving forward, and then shooting up to the ceiling at their enemies, from below. So I didn't want to hit them with something that would be like a total party kill with some sort of, unfair smackdown, but at the same time, this is the final battle of the campaign, right? This is it. So I am hitting them with forces so hard that I fully expect at this time that not all the travelers are going to make it out of this thing alive. Now eventually the player characters, they held Seven's forces back. However, many rounds it was that I had secretly decided as my timer for this meat grinder, and at that point Grandfather finished his work. So he stumbles out of the control center almost dead, collapsing on the floor and just reaching up to the travelers for help. Now it's at this time, this moment, the adventure offers us a choice. Grandfather is vulnerable. Instead of a god, for this one brief moment, he's an old, half-dead droid. If there were a moment to kill him, they could do it right now, no roll even required. Now, it worked out this way, and this was just absolutely perfect. I couldn't have planned this better. So there were 3 characters outside the door when Grandfather came stumbling out. Dr. Brevis, who was injured to the point of unconsciousness, Benjamin, who was seriously injured and pretty much holding his guts in at this point, and Peachy, who was banged up but by far in the best condition of all of them. So his grandfather's reaching out to him for help. Peachy remembers this conversation with Galen, how Grandfather's existence was a threat to the Imperium, and how he and the rest of the travelers would be fully pardoned and even rewarded if they killed Grandfather. So I was really curious to what Peachy would do now that he had this perfect opportunity, because Grandfather was outside of Benjamin. That had been his hang-up before.
And I told you, I ain't no freaking traitor. The Imperium can blow me. Come on, Grandfather, let's blow this popsicle stand.
Within a few short seconds, Grandfather managed to collect himself, his strength and powers returning. He sensed what it was that Peachy had been offered and how Peachy did not betray him. And then with a blast of sonic power, Grandfather cleared the passage of all the remaining bad guys, just slamming them all up against the wall, and the travelers ran back to the dart. Now, dodging more falling debris, they headed straight towards the city's hangar, blasting it apart the stone wall that was separating it from the city. Now, behind them, Seven's enormous form is writhing and struggling beneath this onslaught of solar flares, its hull growing white-hot from the heat, until the robot warship is finally hurled against the cave wall and blasted to cinders. So as the travelers are flying up to the surface, this miniature star erupts, melting the world city and everyone inside to magma. And this blast of superheated steam goes sending tsunamis across the planet, wiping out all the Vargar coastal cities around the world, but also freeing all the sentient sea slug slaves that the Vargar had been holding. And finally, the ancient technology allowing this star to exist inside the planet is destroyed, so this microstar just winks out. Rejoining the Star Hunter in orbit, the Game Master has a choice at this point. This task complete, Grandfather might just simply leave, not even bothering to say goodbye, then just disabling all the Ancients technology that the player characters have on his way out, just to keep it out of primitive hands. I, however, chose the other route. So with his archive and secret base destroyed, Grandfather needed to rebuild everything, and he'd realized that while he had no interest in ruling humanity or any other races throughout the galaxy, severing his ties with them altogether, as he'd done in the pocket dimension, that wasn't a good idea either. And while Seven was now dead, more Grandfather's clone sons might be out there and alive and just waiting to strike now that Seven was gone. Then, of course, there are these outside threats, such as this, that was been previously unaware of, such as this giant psionic wave that Grandfather had only learned about from Seven. And now that he knew about it, he had to do something to stop this thing from hitting all of chartered space. But because the travelers had proven themselves to him, he asked if the travelers would be interested in becoming his agents for these endeavors.
Yes! I mean, sure.
Uplifting the travelers, each of them receives higher stats, +4 strength, +4 dex, higher intelligence and education, given psionics, natural armor protection, regeneration. They no longer aged, becoming immortal, and none of these upgrades were detectable by electronic scans. For his initial temporary base, they traveled 60 parsecs to Cordillon in the Sendoff subsector of the Trojan Reach, the same world that the precursors had terraformed long ago, now a crappy backwater with less than 1,000 residents. Deep beneath the mountains, they discovered a hidden network of tunnels and bunkers, similar but not quite exactly like the ones that Otter had constructed in Chapter 6. Peachy, who wanted nothing to do with the Third Imperium or with archaeology, expressed interest in continuing his work in robotics. Grandfather needed to rebuild his robot helpers, so he took Peachy on as his personal assistant, designing and constructing the machines that would create Grandfather's forces. Now, while Benjamin had sworn loyalty to Grandfather, he hated that the memory of him in the Imperium was forever marred by this brand of being a traitor, and Grandfather being a computer expert far beyond anything that the Imperium could even dream of, he easily hacked the mail network, unloading an AI worm to alter the records, to pardon the travelers, just remove their names entirely from any of the events concerning the Vlyn Backett investigation, and restoring Benjamin's honor. Benjamin and Dr. Brevis were sent to the core sector and capital. Both of them had the highest social ranks by far, with him being a huge war hero and her being a celebrated academic. There they moved in influential circles, rooting out any of Seven's remaining agents and manipulating political figures while also searching the library plan of reference for any unidentified threats, as well as locating potential locations for Grandfather's permanent base. After a few years, and before too many people noticed that the two of them weren't aging, they left the core sector, but not before an obscure backwater world near the Great Rift quietly vanished from all Imperial records and star charts. Lily and Amelia took the Star Hunter and returned to the Vargar Extents. Her mission was to infiltrate the Church of the Chosen Ones, find and eliminate all still loyal to Seven, and move their religion into a force for Grandfather. Now, while she never officially became the leader of the Church herself, she controlled this religion from the shadows, from behind the figureheads, and increasing its membership and power throughout the Extents and the Imperium. Otter and Hilda took the Dart, and after an amazing vacation at Bimmy Juffet's tropical resort, they headed coreward to investigate the approaching psionic wave, its origins, and how to stop it. Now, while they have discovered much, as of yet, they haven't figured out a solution to the galaxy's looming destruction. Anyone wanting to know more about the wave, again, I strongly recommend checking out Mark Miller's brilliant Agent of the Imperium. Overall, this campaign campaign was a complete blast. I mentioned before how I hadn't been looking to run a long campaign, at least one as long as this, but after reading and ruling out several other campaigns from various RPGs, this one just really hooked me. It took us a total of 19 months and somewhere around 180 play hours to complete. I love the way that each chapter presented a different theme. We had a murder mystery, fugitives on the run, a dungeon crawl in space, prison break, a disaster movie, giving them not only just a unique location for each chapter, but also a unique feel, focusing on different skill sets that the travelers might want. My favorite was chapter 6, where there were the precursors. I walked into that one just completely worried that this thing might crash and burn on us, but ended up being my very favorite part of this entire campaign. I deeply hope that Mongoose goes in and updates the book to correct some of the errors, especially the maps in chapter 4, putting the handouts in the actual book itself. I do appreciate that they're in a free downloadable PDF for people to download and print them out themselves, but it just drives me bats that they don't actually appear inside the campaign book itself. These are among my biggest true complaints about the campaign, but they were not that difficult for Mongoose just to go in and update the PDF and then update any future printings of the physical book. Now, as far as the sequel and prequel campaigns that have been released now, I've seen a lot of players who believe that they have to run them in order of Mysteries of the Ancients, then Secrets of the Ancients, followed by Wrath of the Ancients, and that annoys me to no end. Secrets of the Ancients was out there for years, for multiple game editions before Mysteries and Wrath were released. It wasn't designed to be the middle of a trilogy. It's kind of like Star Wars, We had the original trilogy for years and were perfectly happy with it, and we wanted more and we loved it, but then this prequels released several years later, but those also spoil some of the later movies, such as Darth Vader's true identity. So it's not necessary to run Mystery of the Ancients first. Now, if any game masters out there do, it's also not necessary to play it with the same characters that they're going to be playing Secrets of the Ancients with, or maybe once they're finished with Secrets of the Ancients, they write up some new characters and they do the prequel adventure. Because how Mysteries of the Ancients ends, it makes Secrets of the Ancients a very different experience than it was originally intended to be. Now, my biggest suggestion for this campaign, and the best decision that I made while running it, was writing the characters specifically for this campaign, with each choosing a planet in the Regina subsector as their homeworld. That one worked wonderfully for us. I only wish that I had also decided to establish relationships with Uncle Vlyn with all of the player characters instead of just half the player characters, and then you could have it where Uncle Vlyn was somehow involved in all of the travelers getting to know each other and meeting each other, because Uncle Vlyn had actually secretly been kind of assembling this team because he was going to recruit them as his agents. So now that they've been assembled by Uncle Vlyn, they can be part of Uncle Vlyn and Seven's undoing. And while some parts of this campaign were a tad rough, hopefully this campaign diary with my suggestions and maybe any of the maps and the handouts that I made will help any game masters out there with running this campaign a whole lot easier. So if you are looking for an epic, long-term science fiction campaign with multiple themes spanning worlds and dimensions and even time itself, I highly recommend Secrets of the Ancients.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or how-tos, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, travelers, you have a great day. One thing I was wondering about is, did Grandfather actually lie to us or not? Was he some sort of mutant super droid that built an empire that was eventually toppled by him cloning his own sons? Or was he just some sort of science experiment that was created by the droid or some sort of other ancient power that's out there?
It actually never really says for sure. It just lets game masters decide on their own. So I decided that Grandfather was telling the truth, or at least he believed he was telling the truth. Because in all honesty, if Grandfather was manufactured, then whoever it was that had the technology to manufacture something like Grandfather would also be able to make it to where Grandfather believed he had any origin that they wanted him to think that he had. But I decided to go with the idea that Grandfather really was telling the travelers the truth.
So the fact that the final chapter was titled Grandfather Lies, that could be a spoiler or not, really just depending on whatever it is the Game Master feels like saying. Interesting. Either way, You have pulled off the longest pre-written campaign that you have ever attempted, and it was a screaming success.
These aren't bad, though.
This outfit is way hotter than it looks.